Welcome to the final installment of the design thinking process. Here we're looking at prototyping and then taking those prototypes to test. This is all part of our online program on design thinking, which we deliver over several installments, about 7 or 8 installments over 5 days or so as to sort of keep a good pace, but not to overwhelm everyone with too much screen time. Of course, this is a 2-hour module that comes near the back end of the program. The program's delivered online using Zoom for communications and using virtual collaboration tools such as Mural, and sometimes we use Miro as well. Now, if you look at the design thinking process, we start off at the exploration, trying to figure out what's possible. There's a bit of confusion at this stage. We are trying to learn what the problem is, what is the customer's situation, and we're trying to frame really what our focus should be for the rest of the journey. The prototyping part comes in much later. This is when we already have some strong ideas that we feel are worth pursuing, and the prototyping is really our attempt to make those conceptual ideas much more concrete so that we can go to the final stage of actually testing. Now, the reason why we prototype is because we're wanting to get feedback on our ideas. You know, when we have an idea, they start out very abstract, and it's quite difficult for customers to give us good feedback on those ideas because there's a lot of scope for misunderstanding. But when we actually take our idea into a concrete form, even in something as simple as, say, a paper prototype or a simple storyboard, our customer can touch, can feel the idea, and can interact with the idea. And so we're getting a much truer reflection of their true feelings about the idea when we make that prototype manifest into a physical form. Prototyping is an active process. It involves us building, creating something, or making something. There's a testing component, and part of the testing is for us to learn and take that learning and iterate and improve our ideas as we move forward. The idea is not to use prototyping to sell our idea to our customer, but rather to really find out how that idea could be better. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can prototype, and it all depends on the kind of solution that we have. Sometimes our solution has a physical form, and so we will create a physical prototype. In other instances, it is an experience, and so we have to find a way to prototype what is a service, for example, either digitally or a person-to-person service. And sometimes the prototype may actually have to be the prototyping of a space or an environment. And again, so depending on what kind of idea you're dealing with will depend on the kind of prototype that would be appropriate. So if we look at the first one, which is the physical manifestation of a prototype, even some experiences might have some tangible elements that we can prototype. Here are 2 very simple examples. A wallet that's made out of tape and paper and sort of stapled together. And of course, putting in some cards and money sort of gives it this semblance of whether the form of this product it works for the customer, and also does it function as intended. The other example I have here is the health plate, and this is just a simple plastic plate which is trying to indicate sort of how much of the plate should have fresh and veggies, and the other part which maybe could have the carbohydrate or the protein. And so simply by using sort of a black marker, the designers have written some guidelines on the plate, and the thinking is that this plate, when presented to a customer, would give them some good nudges in the right direction in terms of how to eat a little more healthier. A very simple idea, but you get the picture in terms of exactly how the real product might actually turn out. Now, an environmental prototype is about creating a sense of space. This particular example here is for an exhibit, and it's about creating screens. It's about creating a journey through a space. And so by creating the physical form, we get a good sense of whether the flow works for the customer, whether it makes sense, or is it confusing, Is it enough space? Is there enough space for people to stand and to view the screens, and enough space for people to walk past, for example? And so it would be good to get people walking through the space and then adjusting some of the elements as sort of live as you're learning as you go along. Service prototypes, there are a lot of options for us. One of the options is that we can conduct a kind of role-playing situation. So where you have a service interaction between perhaps a customer service representative and a customer, you can create a interaction space. This example on the left is a service counter. And so you have somebody presenting themselves, perhaps looking for something, asking for something, and a customer service person sort of responding. And it's through that interaction in that space that we then sort of learn something about this new idea. There's another way to share a sort of service, and that is more in a story or visual form. And so rather than doing a real world sort of interaction, we create a storyboard. So this is a couple of frames of sort of explaining, what happens first, what happens second, third, and fourth, with some words to sort of walk people through how this particular experience actually sort of pans out. And of course, as we go through, we would then be getting the feedback from our customer. Some services actually are more in a digital realm, so it could be an application that our customer interacts with, or some kind of kiosk that they may work by themselves. And so we can create some frames for each of the digital screens, for example, that they may interact with, and then present each of those screens in sequence as somebody walks through a particular task, for example. So that is a more sort of conceptually oriented, but equally valid as a prototyping exercise. Once we've got our prototype, the key thing is really to put it in front of customers and get some good feedback. One of the great ways to do that is to do something called think aloud testing, where you ask the customer to interact with your prototype, and as they interact with the prototype, you ask them to verbalize what is going through their mind. And so should they have any confusions or concerns or even delights or things that really excite them, you ask them to actually say them out loud so that the designers and the interviewers can actually document those. The key thing here is you want to capture lots of good, honest feedback. You're not looking for the customer simply to say good things about your product, but rather you want to see where are the areas of improvement. So documenting all of those feedback across several customers, for example, would then help you to push your ideas further down the line. So that's the prototyping component and the testing component, which is the final module of the design thinking program. If you're interested in knowing more about our design thinking projects and some of the clients that we've worked with, feel free to go over to invitroinnovation.com. Also, if you're interested more in our virtual programs around design thinking, you can look at everywhereinnovators.com.